Hi, Jessica.
Hello, how are you?
Great.
Thank you so much for joining me and kindly agreeing to facilitate a short Q&A with us. For those of you watching, Claudia is a professional advisor at Job Access, part of the National Disability Recruitment Coordinator Programme, and it's a government-funded initiative driving disability employment. So our team have put together a series of questions for you, specifically around your experience of finding employment, your experience of having disability and trying to find work, some of the barriers that you may have come up against, and some questions around your role specifically in Job Access.
Fantastic.
Okay?
Yep.
All right, so let's get started. First question. What are some of the incorrect assumptions people have had about your disability when it comes to employment?
Yeah, so I'm blind, and I'm really happy to use that term. I have very, very low vision, and I suppose one of the first ones is actually about what blindness is. And generally people jump to the conclusion that blindness means total blindness, whereas it's actually quite a large spectrum from not being able to read the top line on a reading chart, even with corrected vision. So yeah, I suppose that's the first big one, and then the other more practical things like this sort of assumption that, there's often a requirement to have a driver's license, for example, and equating that with not being able to travel. But, I suppose there's quite a big difference between a requirement for being able to travel, because there's lots of different ways that you can achieve being able to travel for a job, and then actually not holding a driver's license. And, for some roles is a requirement to have a driver's license, but not always, I suppose. And the third thing I sort of wanted to tackle was the idea that just because a job's been done a certain way for a very, very long time doesn't mean that's always the way that it has to be done. Yeah. There's lots of ways to meet an inherent requirement of a role, and it might just not be the same way that it's always been done.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. Really important points. Second question we have for you. In your role as a professional advisor with Job Access, you meet with a variety of different organisations to review their recruitment and onboarding processes. What are the clear barriers that you've seen in recruitment across the board for someone with a disability?
I mean, there's plenty. People's websites not being accessible, people can't actually read the job applications, or can't fill in an application, I suppose. But I think probably the biggest barrier is actually the job advertisements themselves. So they're often really wordy, filled with lots of technical jargon, but they don't actually tell people what you need to do on a daily basis. So they're reading this big blurb, and there's lots of big fancy words, but actually what you need to know is you'll be answering telephones, you'll be greeting customers, and it talks about that in might be big other words. So I think just trying to keep advertisements in particular simple, and try not to have a lot of clutter in them, just really keep them simple.
Yeah. Great advice. That kind of leads in really nicely to our third question, which is specifically around job descriptions and job adverts, and what advice that you'd give to recruiters to ensure that these are as inclusive and accessible as possible. One of the things you mentioned was the jargon, the terminology, inclusive language. Is there anything else that really kind of key take-home points on how to make that accessible?
Try to get rid of those adjectives. Excellent customer service skills. What's excellent? What does that actually mean? And I think also, just I suppose thinking also about the application process as well. Having a contact point to ask questions if you get stuck, if you're having trouble submitting information, being able to pre-fill, applications as well. I think all of those things are really important, and having alternative ways of submitting applications, like maybe being able to send an email, or not having to even, just spoke with an organisation the other day that don't even, you can just call up on the phone. They're so desperate for staff that they don't care. You can just have a conversation with them, talk about your experience, and they'll get the details from you that way, rather than actually having to fill in application forms and put in CVs and things like that. So I thought that was fantastic. That's hugely barrier free.
Yeah, So a less structured approach?
I think so, you know, absolutely. I mean, that's not going to work for everyone. Some people will prefer being a bit more formal about it, and you know, and also, you know, may not have the ability to be able to necessarily talk by phone. So, you know, conversing by email might actually be more appropriate. So I think having lots of different ways for people to be able to access information is really great. And you know, sometimes if the advertisement is really confusing, having that contact person that you can just pick up the phone and chat to could be really useful, or emailing people questions, same sorts of ideas.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything in the order in which a job advert is written, or the sort of the complexity or length of it? Do you think that poses a potential barrier as well?
Oh, absolutely. Often they're, you know, pages long, and you're just like, I just want to know, what do you actually need me to do? Am I the right person to even bother putting in an application? So, you know, it's nice to have a little bit of a summary about the company. That's fine, but I can get a lot of that information hopefully from your website. But, you know, what I'm actually interested in looking at is the job itself. So, you know, trying to really highlight those inherent requirements, the what actually has to be done, and then, you know, just really trying to keep it to that, I think, and you know, and then the contact details, and just really trying to keep it very simple.
Agreed. So keep into the essentials, don't hyperinflate a job adverts, structure it in a way that's easy to read, and get rid of any lingo or jargon that isn't necessary.
Yeah, and you know, try to keep it text-based. I mean, it's fine to have pictures, you know, because some people do learn that way, if you know, if that's appropriate. But you know, having just plain text, not, you know, videos are fine if you're going to make them accessible. So including captions, audio description for people who are blind or have low vision. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely essential. Okay, great. Let's move on to the next question from the team. Okay, so what part of the recruitment process in general would you change or get rid of if you could? So what makes the least sense to you out of all the general recruitment processes?
Interviews. Like, you know, it's often the thing that people jump to. It's what we've always been doing. It's always how we've been assessing people. But really, for a lot of jobs, you know, an interview is really about assessing people's presentation skills. And not all jobs actually require, you know, presentation skills as part of the inherent requirements of the role. So where you're not actually needing people to be able to present, or, you know, have good spoken skills, why are we interviewing people? It's, you know, is that the best way of assessing someone's suitability? So thinking about maybe having work trials, yeah, or practical things that they can do to show that they're actually a good fit for those inherent requirements of the role. In, you know, in addition, or maybe completely removing the interview entirely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can appreciate that point. I think the standard interview structure can be quite daunting. It has inflexibility. So I think actually demonstrating that you can have a little bit of wiggle room around how the interview is facilitated to best showcase somebody's skills, their experience in a way that they feel most comfortable. I think being adaptive and flexible in that is a great approach. So yeah.
Yeah, but you know, we're even hearing from organisations that are just removing the interview entirely. So, you know, they're actually just, they might have a chat with somebody, but you know, realising that for some people with disability, actually being able to talk to somebody is not their strength. You know, being able to do a task is where their strengths lie. So, yeah.
Yeah, something more functional, something more task-based, as opposed to a one-to-one conversation where it's all reliant on communication.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, great. No, great advice. Thank you. Our next question. So there's a lot of work to be done to address the fear factor around talking about disability. When it comes to trying to better understand an individual's needs, what sort of questions should we be asking or not asking in a screening or interview process if someone has disclosed a disability?
So first of all, I'd just like to pick up on the word disclosure. We're really trying to move away from that word disclosure because it sort of can particularly apply around disability, meaning that there's something big or nasty that you've got to share or reveal, you know, like it's that you're hiding something. So we're trying to use the word sharing information. So, you know, sharing information about your disability instead. So I suppose, just always, again, remembering to bring it back to the inherent requirements of the role. So, talking about what needs to be done. So, what can we do to help you be able to do that part of the job, not particularly focusing on somebody's disability. And asking the question what we can do to support you. I suppose, do you have any access requirements? They're the things that are really helpful, rather than sort of getting focused on someone's disability, but just really trying to think about the ways that you can support people to be able to do their role successfully.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Focus on the skills, the experience, not on the disability. But if somebody is requiring or wanting to talk about ways in which to best support them, just open up the conversation around, well, how do we do that? Let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, people with disability do really know what's worked for them in the past in similar situations, and particularly where we've been able to be really clear about what we're trying to achieve in the role, where people really know the things that they need to do, it makes it so much easier to support those discussions. So in my previous role, I had to travel a lot, right? And it used to be that there was a driving license requirement for that role. But because they were able to tell me, okay, you're needing to go to, four locations per day, potentially in the community, they were able to actually give me a taxi card so that I was able to travel. They were paying everybody else's car fees. So, that was the same sort of cost to the organisation. But because they were really clear about what the travel actually looked like, it was really easy to kind of go, okay, well, I could meet that by using taxis instead.
Yep. Simple, but so effective. Okay, that actually leads nicely into our next question. Keep doing this. What have been some of your most positive workplace experiences when it comes to accessibility or understanding your needs?
Oh, well, I've been so lucky. I've really worked in a number of great organisations. I worked for a blindness organisation, so they really understood blindness and low vision, and it was just a given that when I walked into the organisation, they said, okay, you've got to use a computer. What software do you need? What adjustments do you need? They looked at lighting in the workplace, and it was just so very easy. And yeah, the same with the next organisation that I worked in. They worked with people with complex disabilities, and so they'd never worked with someone with vision impairment before. But they it wasn't a problem. They said, okay, sure, tell me what you need. And we contacted Job Access, and I got a workplace assessment done, and they were able to provide the modifications that I needed in that workplace, which were quite minimal, because it was really just an accessible software for my computer. So yeah, that was fine. And my current employer, well, they what they don't know about employment for people with disabilities isn't worth knowing. So yeah, the process was really fantastic here. So I've been so lucky. I suppose one of the other standouts, I'm a guide dog user, and one of the organisations that I worked in had a policy that any employee with a guide dog, they had to provide a suitable relief area on site for my guide dog to toilet. And that was brilliant, because the reality is, often as a guide dog user, I spend my lunch hours trying to go and find somewhere that's suitable, and then try and find a bin, whereas by having it on site was just such a time saving. It was just so handy. So yeah, that was really fantastic.
Yeah, great. So I'm assuming that those conversations around kind of what support you need in place were had very, very early on, and that made a massive difference.
Oh, absolutely. We're really trying to encourage people to start having those conversations the minute a letter of offer has been provided to someone. Because the reality is that even with best of intentions, things like computers, just for regular staff members, people without disability, can take ages to arrive within an organisation and get set up. So the earlier that we can try and start the modification process as well, and start getting that ready so that you're ready to start your job on day one.
Yeah, absolutely. It just puts confidence in the organisation you're working for, that you've been listened to, that things are going to be in place, and you can do your job effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, let's move on to our next question. Okay, it's a little bit different. So have you seen a shift in the attitudes or awareness towards disability since you started working in this role?
I mean, I'm really lucky. I get to work with employers who are at the beginning of their journeys towards accessibility. So I actually get to watch hopefully the culture shift in an organisation over the 12-month partnerships that we're working on. So yes, I have definitely been able to see that. I suppose not so much in some of the organisations that I've worked at previously, because they've already been quite advanced in their thinking around disability largely, but I've certainly seen a shift in my lifetime around attitudes towards disability. I suppose when I left school, I was basically provided some career advice that told me I had 3 career options, and I could be a piano tuner, I could do reception work, or I could do computing stuff, tech stuff. So nowadays I think that largely we're really trying to challenge those attitudes and say that people with disability can be employed in any area that they would really like to be. Possibly currently there's still probably a few restrictions around blindness, like jet fighters, aircraft captains, but I'm sure it won't be long until, we get over those hurdles.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thank you. Fantastic. Okay. We've got 2 more questions left, Claudia, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So from what you understand, are employees with a disability getting promoted the same way as employees without a disability?
I reckon this is one of the areas that is probably still needs quite a lot of work. I mean, we're still struggling to get people with disability employed in the first place. The rates of unemployment and underemployment are still quite high for people with disability, and really haven't been moving as much as they need to. And I think that that idea of promotion is probably the next battlefield. I think, though, the other thing that we need to sort of think about is that actually not everybody wants to be promoted in that sort of, particularly moving into a managerial sort of role. And I did read a fantastic article. I think it might have been Telstra were doing some fantastic work around actually sort of having different ways of progressing in the organisation that didn't necessarily mean moving into a managerial role. That there was sort of like technical leads, so you could become higher in your technical role without necessarily having to manage people.
Right.
And I think that's a really interesting idea. And also just realising that some people might enjoy just staying where they are, and being happy. But I suppose being able to have those conversations with people, or, even considering, just making sure that people are being offered training opportunities, and having that conversation with people is really fantastic as well, I think.
I think it's letting everybody know, regardless of whether they have a disability or not, that there are options available if you did want to progress up the ladder, or if you wanted to shift across or upscale or take on some training or, personal development. I think it's, as you said, the conversation and making everybody in that team aware of how do you navigate that and what support systems are available to, maybe if that needs to look a little bit different for you, then this is what we can put in place. But everybody should be given the same opportunities to progress if they so
definitely.
wish. Yeah. 100% agree. Okay, and then our final question is just around any key take-home messages for an organisation that was wanting to be more inclusive in the hiring, and what resources are available so that people can learn a little bit more.
I just need to plug my own organisation, Job Access. So really, the partnerships that we offer through the National Disability Recruitment Coordinator, they're free for 12 months. We're holding your hand. We're walking you through, looking at your recruitment processes, providing training to your staff, and then connecting you up with disability employment services. So you've got that candidate pool of talent. And so I just think that's, give us a call, pick up the phone, send us an email. We're always happy to chat to you if you would like some support. I think that's the key take-home message. And I think the other thing is that often organisations are really afraid to start because they haven't got all of their ducks in a row. And but we haven't done any training. We haven't looked at our recruitment processes. that doesn't matter. I mean, the reality is that you're likely to already be employing people with disability in your organisation, even if you don't know it, and that it doesn't have to be a really scary process because you're already there, you're already doing it. So I think the fact is just actually start the process, be prepared to get out there, and it's actually not scary. And I think the last thing is that often people say, oh, but our organisation, we're not wheelchair accessible, and remembering that actually 90% of people's disabilities are invisible, they're not able to be seen, and actually only a really small percentage, something like 2% of people with disability are actually wheelchair users. So and there's services available like Job Access's Workplace Assistance Fund, the Employment Assistance Fund, I should say, that can assist with modifications if you do end up having someone with, who might be using a wheelchair, actually apply and be successful in getting a role, that we can actually look at funding modifications to your workplace. So, yeah, I just think don't be afraid to start trying.
No, absolutely. I think if you waited for the situation to be perfect, you'd never make a start. And the most important thing is just to start. And a lot of it is a learning process along the way. And you figure it out as you go along, and you kind of get more experience, and you have different conversations, and you seek different support. And I can definitely advocate for the support we've been receiving here at Beaumont People through Job Access. I know that we have met a few times now, Claudia, and we've kind of started that recruitment review process here within our organisation. And it's been a fantastic resource. We can sit down, we can kind of review where things are up to, maybe some areas for development and things that we can be working on, set a bit of a timeline around that. So it feels like a really collaborative, supportive process. We know you've got that little bit of hand holding as you go through those changes. We have a point of contact in yourself that we know we can come back to with any questions or queries, which is great. So we're kind of not in it by ourselves. We're kind of in the journey all together. It's a joint goal. And I think it's just for everybody to have that awareness and understanding that there's a resource there. It's free, it's accessible to everybody. Take it up. And it's about starting that journey to become more accessible and inclusive in the workplace, so that your services are as accessible to every person. And I think that's one of the most important moves that we've made here, is actually sign that partnership for the next 12 months, starting the journey, and learning as we go along. And hasn't have to be perfect. It's just starting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that are all our questions for today. So thank you very, very much. We are going to share this with our team in a way of trying to increase our awareness and our appreciation around disability employment, and things that we can be working on as an organisation to kind of improve our practices and keep raising the bar on accessibility and disability employment. So thank you so, so much. Really appreciate it. And I'll speak to you very soon.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your time.
No worries.
Bye, everyone.